Good morning, everyone. It's been a pretty exciting session this morning. It's always nice to hear about your industry in a very positive light. And I'm very excited by what Sue says in terms of funding. I'm an entrepreneur. Obviously, that's what excites me most. But today, this session that I thought about was more to do with challenges, existential challenges that companies face when they try to operate in the serious games space, right? So that's the perspective that I'm taking. If you are an institute or a customer who's interested in looking at serious games as a solution that you want to adopt, then perhaps this talk may be interesting to you just as a way to get empathy with your vendors, right? But this is a talk more centered towards developers, and that's, those are the people that I'm addressing. As a quick background for Playware, for those of you who don't know Playware is one of the serious games companies in Singapore. We've been in operation since 2005. We've released over 70 serious games. Most of the work that we do is with the Ministry of Education. Most famously, we've done work with the Future Schools Singapore. This was an initiative started by MOE in 2007. We've also worked with NIE for the Classroom of the Future. We worked with several polytechnics and universities for games, for management, for accounting, for auditing. We've done examinations based in games. This is with, most notably with the national education curriculum. We have done games for history training, for language training across all sectors in K-12 education and, as I said, university education as well. We are very blessed to be in Singapore. We have 20 people and from all different nationalities. We are like a mini United Nations. We've got people from Indonesia, from Thailand, from Myanmar, from Korea, from Australia, from India, and Singapore. Okay. Of all, the reason that I'm standing here today is that of all the games that I've actually rolled out so far, we've actually seen there to be resonance in most project management. There is a strong sense of continuity, and this is not a good continuity. This is a bad continuity of issues and problems that subsist in pretty much every project that we've done. And this is in an advanced economy like Singapore. Singapore uses a lot of educational games. I was just saying, across defense, healthcare, even civic awareness, Singapore is one of the front runners in terms of adoption of game technology. So I think my experience is going to be sort of trying to focus on. I'm going to try to talk about projects that we've experienced, projects that we've rolled out, and what are some of the issues that we've seen that we come across consistently. We've done some very, very exciting work in the Future Schools project. This is a school-wide implementation. I think I have never actually seen across the globe any other school use play quite as seriously as the Future School that we work with. The Canberra Primary School uses it. All 1,600 students in Canberra play games on a regular basis through many different types of devices. They have programs in place that let children make games as well as play them. They have an astounding number of teachers involved in the process of using games in the classroom, making games as well. So there are 14 games being made by teachers in Canberra at this point in time. They're doing some very interesting action research in the area of games. I think it's one of those researches that Sue was talking about. They actually have control groups and test groups of students in different classes doing the same curriculum through games and not through games. And so they're very, very serious about using games. And this is something that's been going on for almost 4 years now. So as you can imagine, kids are extremely engaged in this process. And one of the things that I'd like to report, and I'm definitely, I caveat that I'm not trying to take any undue credit. So it's not all because of games, but Canberra actually has been performing extremely well since they've adopted the Future Schools curriculum. In Singapore, selecting schools is a very big issue. If you're following the local news, it can become a very contentious issue as well. And Canberra actually has been very high recently in the ranking and the selection of the parents. So they actually have over 200 times, 200% oversubscription of the seats every year in terms of the students wanting to get in. They also have a 100% passing cohort and a very high proportion of A's and A pluses. In Singapore, academics are extremely important. Even if we talk about play and games, schools want to know how do students perform when it comes to exams. So, Canberra has actually been doing this extremely well. However, some of the issues that I'm going to talk about are issues that we've actually also seen in Canberra. And, even in an organization like Canberra, who has been using games for such a long amount of time, for such a large amount of time, these problems come up often. So this is why I think that they're really interesting to address. So this one is the obvious one. I think if you're sitting here, you know this. Games are everywhere, and pretty much everybody is spending a lot of time on games. As Sue was talking about, games are an extremely large proportion of the entertainment expenditure today. And we've sort of, over the generations, seen that inhibition about playing games go away. When I was young, it wasn't a very good activity to be playing games very often. This was something that your parents would talk about. And as we saw, there are even educational institutes and parents who are starting to buy games for their children. This is happening on a regular basis. It's becoming so persuasive as a medium that we can actually see games where none exists. So just as a quiz, how many people can recognize this game? Okay. So it's becoming very popular. The metaphors for gaming are becoming extremely strong, and these are some things that it's getting embedded in our psychology, which is a good thing. And as Einstein said, there's a lot of research today, especially neuroscience research, that shows that games are a very effective tool, in fact, a very, very effective tool for education. And now this is getting backed up by action research as well. So yes, games are good, games are everywhere, people are getting used to games, and games are very effective as an educational tool. So all of those things are true. Well, this is the problem. This is one of those problems that I think pretty much every developer faces at some point. You come to a starry-eyed to a customer. They really want to use games. They're consumers of some sort, are playing a lot of games, whether it's kids or corporates, adults. Everybody is playing games. You can just have to walk into the MRT in Singapore to see how pervasive games are. But the issue is, it is still a very, very new medium. And for many reasons, it is also an extremely expensive medium. If you look at it in terms of rationale, if you look at it from a management SWOT analysis, developing a game is, ranks high up there amongst some of the most expensive courseware development, right? So if you're going to develop any kind of courseware, pretty much any other sort of courseware in terms of development is cheaper to do than games. Okay, so this is a pretty interesting note. So very often you will go to a customer and they definitely can see the benefit of using a game, but they can't see the rationale behind using a game. There are many, many ways to keep people entertained and engaged. Gamification is proving that extremely well. Other than that, there are so many other things that you can do. I have very often spoken to schools and said, listen, it's not all video games. If you want to use games or play in the classroom, you can use a board game, you can use a card game. Hell, you can just use a simple social game. And by social here, I don't mean through a device. Social as mean, the high-tech version where you can actually talk to the other person, right? So those kind of games also work very, very well. So what is so unique about the educational game, like the commercial game, and what sets it apart? So very often, when I talk about the rationale of using games in the classroom, we're not just purely talking about the money involved, but we're talking about how else can the money be spent? What are the other options available? And how do games match up against those options? Okay, so in effect, I think one of the things that we are facing as an industry, we are actually victims of our own success. Serious games is a victim of the success of the entertainment game industry, right? I have a very strong belief that if serious games as an industry had picked up first, before entertainment games picked up, we would have seen a completely different landscape. If you're a game developer, this is probably the first thing they teach you in design school. It's extremely hard to design fun. It's extremely, extremely hard to design fun. You're a developer, you know this, right? 95% of all games, and this is in the commercial sphere, this is more than 95% of all released commercial games fail. I'm not even talking about the games that never reach release phase, right? So not only are you stuck in a medium that's extremely expensive to produce, you are stuck in a medium that's expensive to produce with large odds stacked against your success, right? So you've got several questions that you need to ask yourself as a developer, and the development process of an educational game, since the stakes are high, has to be even more thorough than it is for entertainment games, which is ironic since developing serious games is anyways more difficult. So it just adds to the problem. It doesn't take away from that issue, right? Most of the time when customers come to you, most of the conversations that I've always had start with an example of games that they'd like to see, right? The games that they play, games that they enjoy, and if you are extremely lucky, you will have a customer who doesn't play games themselves, but talks about games that children enjoy, right? So that's the starting point. So you're talking about a person who's actually putting a benchmark to you of a game that exists, a commercial game that exists. And very often, since this is a new project, customers find it important to be innovative and take features from other games as well. So, forget about how difficult it is to produce Mario. Obviously, they want elements of Angry Birds in it itself. So you teach something like Mario to teach physics, right? Or something like that. And this is just the beginning. You go to the corporate customers, they want everything from everywhere, right? You go to military schools. We've been doing a lot of work for the military here. And the kind of features that we start talking about, just put stereoscopic 3D on one side, start talking about haptics, start talking about multi-device capability. Obviously, you need social elements. It has to be multiple users at the same time. And, it has all of those things. And obviously, it's so engaging and fun that you do it on your own time and not on the organization's time, right? So this is the list of features that most customers are looking for when they start thinking about games. Very often, when you really sit down and think about it, some of the users that are most interested in using games don't actually need a game to do what they want to do. Very often it is an information challenge. A YouTube click, comedy clip might perform the same function for them in terms of going viral, becoming popular, being accessible. A game might, because the level or the depth of content that they need to impart is actually pretty low. And so very often, you can't actually get past that stage of planning, even though you have an extremely enthusiastic customer with a budget. Very often, though, the problem is that the resources just don't add up, right? You want all of those things, and you don't have budget, right? And the issues that you see, that you face, aren't issues that have to do entirely with technology or design or development. In Canberra, most of the time that Playware has spent has been in an activity called change management. We've been trying to get teachers and students to start using this platform as both a social platform, a learning platform, and a sharing platform. And most of the time, it's not the question of teaching them how to use a game, as it is about how to change the existing methodologies and systems and processes that they have in place to suit the usage of a game. It is more about tweaking content than about creating new content. It is more about changing learning outcomes than about designing fun, right? And so when you start going to a person who wants to use a game, a lot of times as a developer, you're actually struggling with other issues. We've worked with a lot of projects where our role was not just of a technology provider, a game developer. We were also obviously providing hardware and other services. We also did a little bit of interior design work. We did the change management, as I was saying. We did curriculum design. We did PR. We do publicity, obviously. We help with funds procurement. We also track those funds. And this is a typical game developer's life. Across 70 projects, this is an experience that I've actually seen, right? What is it going to fund? We need to budget it. We need to figure out where that budget is going to come from. Who's going to distribute this? How's that distribution going to work? How are we going to make the distribution successful? Who's going to track the metrics of whether the distribution is successful or not? All of those things the developer has to do. So yes, if you're a serious games person, you're a pretty multi-purpose tool. You pretty much do everything, and you do it very well. You do it very, very darn well, right? So very lucky, Playware, we are a part of a group of companies, and in Playware we don't have, we have 20 people and all 20 are developers. We don't have HR people or accounts people. If you can discount me, we don't even have much management in that sense. Most of the people are really hands-on doing development tasks, but my artists do project management, my coders do curriculum design, my 3D artists have done CAD drawings, and pretty much across the whole enchilada. We've done so much different kinds of work that it's amazing. We have, in the classroom of the future, we have systems that change the physical simulation along with the 3D simulation. And obviously, the engineering of those physical simulations was also done by us. So, we've done our own hardware. We've done, in 2007, when we started doing the future schools, we actually set up and built 100-inch touch screens, and those were the first touch screens, because even at that time, iOS was not out. So this is one of the first touch screens in the world. We built a 45 square meter interactive touch screen, and we don't have electronics engineers in office, right? So it's all game developers. Game developers are very can-do, and I think this is, again, a hallmark of this industry. We keep doing pretty much everything. When you go to an organization and when you start thinking about games there, very interesting thing that Professor Beck was saying, that 43% of social gamers are women. And this is an extremely interesting aspect. Because when you go to an educational institute and when you're talking about an educational game, or if you're talking about a serious game, your audience isn't so well described. It's actually very varied. Some of the things that we've seen in Canberra is that I give the same educational game to 2 different kids and I get 2 completely different results. Because there is a lot of things in the background that goes into making a successful gameplay session. How often have you played games before? What kind of games have you played before? Very important in student psychology is, what do your parents think about playing games, right? So what do the teachers think? There are so many things that go into a successful implementation of a serious game, and this is just in a school full of children who play games all the time anyways. When you start thinking about higher education, when you start thinking about military education, when you start thinking about corporate, you have so many other issues that, really the project management of a serious games is actually extremely interesting and extremely, it makes you sort of, it's made me start to wonder, are we doing something wrong in this industry by approaching it in the same way, in the conventional sense that we approach the commercial games business? Pretty much the structures in terms of the organizational thought behind a serious games company is very similar to the organizational structure of a commercial games company. And is that correct? Should we be moving into the SI mentality? And if we do, what then about innovation? What then about fun? What then about design? Everybody wants 3D graphics. I mean, like 3D, in fact, is becoming old now. People want stereoscopic. People want it to feel as lifelike as possible. Augmented reality obviously works extremely well. Gamification is becoming extremely popular. But look around you in commercial games. How much fun is reality? How often do you actually find real-life narratives fun? Very often in commercial games that people equate themselves to, the customers equate themselves to, the fun aspects or the interesting and engaging aspects of that game don't stem from reality. They stem from some sort of an abstraction of reality. How hard is that sell? We were doing a game for MOE, for moral science education, and this was extremely, it was a really, really fun project. And what they wanted us to do was to figure out a way in which kids could make ethically reasoned decisions about what is the right thing to do, what is the moral thing to do. And so, we had a great idea, and we went to them, we said, listen, if you want to make a moral science education game, if you want to make a game where children make the ethically correct choice, there should be an option for them to make the wrong choice. So if you want kids to make good decisions and healthy decisions, give them options to do the unhealthy thing. So, there should be an access to drugs. They should be able to stab people, right? They should be able to engage in young sex, right? Those are the things that you want to struggle with. And if the kids are able to make good decisions in that sense, then they are actually, the reasoning behind their thought process is actually accurate. You can imagine how far that design discussion got. Okay, so I'm sorry. I can still remember their faces. So we've had several such discussions, and across the board, with this was a similar discussion that I've had with the armed forces. The armed forces very often send their soldiers to other countries with other cultures and diverse cultures. In Singapore also, the armed forces have sent their soldiers to Afghanistan, to Iraq, they go for relief operations in Indonesia. What is the right thing to do? What is the social taboo? Right? And when you start thinking about those kinds of games, and when you start thinking about those kinds of moral dilemmas and ethical reasonings and decisions, again, very often we've seen that customers tend to get extremely uncomfortable in making the kind of design that actually propels their thought process forward. Very often, it's just a question of lost in translation. We were trying to develop a game for wastewater management, and the user wanted it to do socially, right? So they wanted this on Facebook. It was a very interesting dilemma about what kind of status updates would users get on their Facebook profile coming from a wastewater management game, and how that becomes social, and how that becomes interesting. What do people want to talk about that, right? Some things just don't translate extremely well. And some things actually create very, very large challenges in terms of, again, like I said, just very basic level design. So now, I have had extremely, I was being good. I was trying to be nice and follow the art of Zen presentation. And so all my slides so far have had very little words and very many graphics. This one is different. This is an abstract construct. This is a method that we've been exploring, and I'm very happy to talk to everybody about hiving. Hiving is a concept that Playware is developing at this point in time, and this is a concept that we think is a methodology for doing serious games in the future. Now, before you sort of crack your heads on this, let me give you the background for this. One of the very startling goals of the Master Plan 3, Educational Master Plan 3 in Singapore, is to have over 20% of in-curriculum education delivered through games. Okay, so there are 500,000 students in Singapore at any one point in time in the K-12 structure, and 20% of their in-classroom education is going to happen through games. On a rough estimate, you are talking about millions of hours of content. If you look at the equivalent in terms of textbook or other resource material that exists in the class as an option to schools today. The kind of budgeting that you would have to do to achieve that would make us all extremely rich. We would all be rolling in it because we are serious games developers. We are here and first in the market. And if actually MOE was to implement anywhere near that kind of in-curriculum usage, it should mean very good things for the industry. The most interesting thing about Master Plan 3 is it actually supposed to be achieved by 2015. So I really anticipate a lot of very interesting things happening in Singapore in the next couple of months, if not years. Our solution to MOE, one of the solutions that we've suggested, and this is a dual purpose exercise. I'm actually trying to talk to you about some solutions that I think exist, and I'm also soliciting opinions from everybody. So I'm going to be here. I'm big and kind of scary looking, but it's just a facade. And I'm very accessible, easy to spot. So you should come up and talk to me if you have any questions about hiving or suggestions. My concept of hiving is to turn the model around. My concept for hiving is that in serious games now, we have to start thinking about new ways of implementing this. I think serious games cannot be delivered to classrooms in the same way commercial games are developed. I think that crowdsourcing, as Sue was talking about, is extremely important. I think that students and teachers and the general public at large, a very large number of people need to be making games as an ecosystem for it to be successful. I don't think that there can be vast majorities or monopolies such as EA in the serious games business. I think this is something because the subject matter are so diverse and because education is a $3 trillion sector at anybody's estimate, it is a much larger part of our lives than entertainment. I think that serious games need to have a completely new model. You will not get advertising sales. Trust me, you can do an educational game distributed through schools, you will not be allowed to put advertisings on those games, right? Especially not to K-12 kids. So what are some modes of payment that you can look at? If you start looking at really serious numbers of adoption in schools, the current pricing models cannot go forward. It is just not rational for schools to pay large numbers of, large amounts of funds for every student to play games. Yes, I'm running out of time. So FreddyHive is one of our platforms. It's modeled on this system. We are looking at many other systems that exist in the world. We think that a lot of systems can come in place. The idea is to crowdsource content. The idea is to develop tools that allow students and teachers to make their own content. The idea is to gamify the concept of social interaction in these development communities to facilitate those. The idea is to allow designers to communicate with large bodies of people who are working in various strata and various sectors and start to look at a wide adoption of games in general. The next time somebody comes to me looking for a commercial game, I wish to be able to do a Sparta on them, right? So this is the serious games industry. I think we are starting to realize that, and as Sue was talking about, I think we need to start recognizing ourselves as a distinct entity, as a different medium, as a completely different ecosystem than the entertainment games business. Thank you.